Good afternoon. This is Rick Hogeboom. Those of you who follow me on Facebook, friends of mine, I love to predict what's going to happen as far as election wise. Been doing it for some years. In 2016, I predicted 49 out of the 50 states correctly and predicted the Trump victory. And so when I have some time on the side, I like to look at polls, compare it to some other data that's available through usually the Secretary of State's website. Each state tracks information and shares some of that information, but not all states share the same level of information. So today I want to look at Michigan because Michigan is an important state, and it's a little bit challenging because Michigan is one of the states that does not provide voter party affiliation data. I want to say about 30 states do share party affiliation breakdown as part of a public records request, as part of voter registration data. In fact, here in Idaho is one of the states that does share that information. Michigan does not. So when polling entities are doing polling, one of the challenges in trying to make sure that they have a good sample size that represents likely voters. You can, of course, look at regional representation, ethnic representation, income, education. Those are all the demographic breakdowns that are generally pretty available that can be found. But the party affiliation is the most, it's the strongest indicator of how someone's going to vote. Usually, if you're a Republican, there's a 90% plus chance you're voting for Trump. If you're a registered Democrat, there's a 90% plus chance you're voting for Harris. Those numbers, that 90% plus on registered Republican or Democrat, is stronger than any other demographic factor in predicting how someone's going to vote. So I always generally look at what the party affiliation is and the sample size of a poll to know whether it's representing what the likely outcome is going to be. So in Michigan, there's the new poll that just came out that has Harris +1. This is the New York Times Siena poll. And I'm going to click here just to kind of fast forward straight to the crosstabs. The crosstab data is going to provide information on who, for example, they have sampled as part of the polling data. And in this case, you see here that they got 688 voters, likely voters, the time frame in which it was conducted. And the New York Times and Siena, they do a very good job actually with their crosstab data. You can see here that they have some questions, and you see the gender, men, women. Down here is the percent. Try to make this a little bit bigger here. You'll see here men, women make up men 48%, women 51% of all the respondents. That is a good representation of the electorate in Michigan. You see the age breakdown, this middle age column here, the 45 to 64 is slightly higher. That also tracks generally with what the breakdown is in the registered voters. So you'll see race, ethnicity, education, region, neighborhood type, city, suburbs, rural. That looks like the city is maybe undersampled here. I would have to look at some demographic data on Michigan. I do have some exit polling from 2020 that I think does ask this question. In fact, I'm going to click over there real quick. I have the tab open here. Let me see on the exit poll data here on Michigan whether that is one. And this is exit poll data from 2020, which does show representation. What I have here is who won in each of these respective demographics, Biden or Trump, and then what the percent of the total vote was within those demographics. So for example, and this will be key when we look at some other crosstab data, the exit poll data, it had Democrats as 38% of the vote. In 2020, it had Republicans at 38% of the vote and independents at 23%. You see Biden won the Democrat vote 97-3. Trump won the Republicans 94-6, and Biden won the independents 51-45. And Biden won Michigan. It was a close race, but he won not quite 3 points, about 2 point, almost 3, but shy of 3. And this is kind of the breakdown. So I was looking here to see if there was a city rural divide. We'll see here the region. Oh, here we go. Okay. So area type, you'll notice right here. Let me try to highlight all of this. This question was asked. Sorry, having a tough time speaking. This question was asked as part of the exit poll in 2020. And you'll see here, urban represented 21% of the collective vote. Biden took the urban 65-35. Suburbs, Trump won narrowly 51-48, and that represented 58% of the exit poll group. And then rural was 21%, and Trump won the rural 54-45. So Trump won the suburbs and he won the rural, but Biden won the urban and he won by a very large margin. And that's what led to the Biden victory, was just this huge 30-point margin. Even though urban only makes up 21% of all the people voting, Trump's victory of the suburbs was really tight, 51-48. And the rural 54-45, but that margin of victory in the city urban context for Biden is kind of what led to the victory. So as I said, I intuitively, I look at a lot of data for a lot of states. And when I looked at this New York Times crosstab, it looked like that they're undersampling the urban vote, and based on the exit poll data. And there's also more data to pull from. I actually have the Michigan. I'm a geek, I know. I have Michigan County data here of what the registered voters are and who won each respective county as a total breakdown. So I just want to say, going back to the New York Times poll here, that this 47% suburbs is okay, close. It's probably in that 50-55%. It was 56% in the exit poll. Rural, I think they're oversampling rural in this group, the New York Times, and they're undersampling the city. So right out of the bat, before I know they have Harris +1 here. This seems to be an undersampling from the city and an oversampling from the rural small town, which, based on this demographics, it should advantage Trump in the polling, and for Harris to be up +1, even with this demographic breakdown in neighborhood type. The Trump camp, the Harris camp Harris might be looking at this and say, hey, we feel that we're better than +1 because they oversampled the rural community. Trump's camp might be looking at this thinking, we got more work to do. It looks like we're only down 1. But a lot of the Michigan polls are pretty tight. So again, it's key to look at this. But there's other indicators, not just the neighborhood type, although neighborhood type, I would say, is maybe the second strongest indicator of how someone's going to vote. I said if you're a registered Republican, registered Democrat, there's a 90% plus chance you're voting for the respective nominee. If you live in the city, suburbs, rural community, city generally votes Democrat, rural community generally votes Republican. The suburbs are kind of the swing vote that can go kind of either way. There's a tighter, and it was in the exit polling from 2020. So if you look here, 2024 vote, they're asked who they prefer. Harris 48, Trump 47. So 6% say other. that also means that some of those people are undecided. I don't believe you're going to see 6% of the vote go to the third party candidates. I believe it'll be closer to 1% to 2%. So you're going to see 4 of that 6%, 2/3 of that 6% end up voting for Harris or Trump. So it'll be interesting to see how they close. And let's see, I'm trying to go here to party ID. I'm going to move my picture over here. Party ID here, you'll see they have 30% Democrats, 27% Republican, 35% Independent. When you look at that data, now this is interesting. You can say that they're possibly oversampling Democrats. As we saw in the exit poll from 2020, and again, Michigan's one of those states where we don't have party affiliation data. So the best you can try to do is look at the exit polls, look at where people are registering to vote regionally as maybe a predictor of what their voting inclinations would be in predictive models. But if you go back to the 2020 exit poll, let's see, we saw 38% Democrat, 38% Republican, 23% Independent. Now, this is what they self-identified as part of the exit poll. And the crosstab that we're looking at, New York Times, here is showing 30% Democrat, 27% Republican, and a larger bulk of independents. Now, there's a couple things that might be happening. One is independents might have been growing as a demographic over the last 4 years, in which case this is capturing some of that. It's possible Democrats are at 30 and Republicans are at 27. I'm suspicious of this breakdown a little bit. Based on the exit polling from 4 years ago, it seems that Republicans and Democrats are more neck and neck. And so I think here there's a little bit challenge in trying to understand the party ID here. They have Democrats at 3% more than Republicans as far as the sample size that they have. In this case, this would favor Harris over Trump. But then you had, I think, the undersampling of the city and the oversampling of the rural, which would favor Trump to, in opposition to Harris. So you have two things here, the neighborhood type and the party ID type, I think, maybe oversampling two different demographic groups that actually advantage each candidate in opposition to each other. So maybe we call that a wash. There's one third thing over here that's really key. I love it when the polls ask the same group, how did you vote in 2020? And what you're wanting to see is if the answer to this question mirrors the outcome of the 2020 election, then you know that you have a good baseline sort of control group. And here you see that that's the case. Out of this group, 41% said Biden, 39% said Trump. That's about the margin of victory is 2 to 3 points. And 14% of this group did not vote 4 years ago. So these would be new people who are showing up to vote for the first time in 2024. And so this is slightly encouraging news for Trump because this same group, they preferred Biden, 41 over Trump, 39, and in the poll, and now they prefer Harris by +1. So this same group said that they voted Biden +2. They prefer Harris +1. So Trump has closed that gap, cut it in half, that 2-point gap by 1. That suggests to me that the 14% of people who didn't vote in 2020, they might be slightly leaning to a point for Trump over Harris. You might have some crossover voting as well, people changing their mind from how they voted. I find it hard to believe that someone voting for Trump in 2020 would be voting for Harris in 24. And also the opposite. I find it hard to believe that someone would be voting for Biden and not be voting for Harris. Although you do see a very slim percent of the voting population that might change their mind in a 4-year swing. But So what does this mean about Michigan? Michigan is a tight race. It's going to be a tight election. I want to pull up here what the polls look like in 2020. I have here all the polls for Michigan going back. Well, I'm not going to show all, but I mean, I literally have every poll for the entire year. And if I scroll over here, the aggregate of those polls, when you lock down the polling cycle that was closest to the election, there's three main polling locations: 270 to win, Real Clear Politics, 538. And you'll see here the final margin: Biden 5.5, Biden 4.2, 538 had Biden 7.9. If you do an average of those three in aggregate, they were predicting Biden winning 5.9. What actually happened is Biden won 2.78. So there was about a 3-point variance from what the aggregate polling was suggesting the outcome would be. The final average for Biden was 50.4 in polling. He got 50.62. So he slightly overperformed in the final polling. But when you look at Trump, final polling was 44.5%. He actually got 47.84%, which was a plus 3.34% variance to his favor. Undecideds or others, here's where I said earlier that I think the other vote will only be between 1% to 2%, and that was the case. The actual vote there was 1.54. So as the polls were ending, you had 5-6% people saying, hey, I'm not sure, or I'm going third party. And that's what we see in the New York Times Siena poll. About 6% are in that camp. I think that's only about 1 to 2 will actually vote for a third party. You're going to see 3 to 4% of those folks vote for either Trump or Biden. So all in all, Trump is pulling stronger today than he was in 2020. He lost by just shy of 3 points. He's pulling by less than 1. He's down 1 point in this poll. If you take the average polls here, which had Biden plus, let's just call it 6, and let's round this up to 3. Let's just say Biden was plus 6 in the polls and he ended up winning by 3. Another way of looking at this is the polls were off in total average by about 3 points. If you were to apply that 3-point factor to the poll of the New York Times Siena poll that has Harris plus 1, one might suggest Trump is really going to be plus 2. And there are some people who are applying kind of a variance factor because Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those 3 states have been notorious in really being off when it comes to underrepresenting Trump's actual performance on election day, both in 2016 and in 2020. I don't know what it is. There's a lot of people who have theorized about the people of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that there might be a blue collar working class group, maybe union employees who feel that they're betraying, their affiliation by saying that they're voting for Biden, and maybe they say other or whatever, or they want to keep it private, and they end up actually voting for Trump. Trump has overperformed in 2016 and in 2020, what the polls suggest. So another way of looking at this is, Harris is plus 1. We're getting closer to election day. It's September 28th. And Trump historically has been plus 3 points or more from what the final polls are. If that holds true for a third election cycle in a row, then Harris plus 1 is really, this is a dead heat. And you can make the case that if Trump overperforms, he's likely slightly ahead. But the demographics of this poll were generally okay. I think they undersample the city, they oversample the rural. We know that there's fewer people in the rural communities than the city, but they also, I think, oversample Democrats and undersample Republicans. So it's kind of an interesting mix there, but we'll see what happens when we get more polling data as we get closer. I will provide some commentary, but hopefully you enjoy this video. Just kind of a breakdown on Michigan, how to read the polls. Hopefully this is helpful. We'll see what happens. Take care.